Good evening. Welcome to Distillery Lab's third Whiskey Talks. I'm Meg Brignadello. I work for the Office of Innovation Management at OSF.
And I'm Audrey Cam, Program Director for the CEO Council Foundation, which is the 501c3 foundation of the Peoria Area Chamber of Commerce. We're thrilled to be here with you tonight. Both of our organizations, Megan's and mine, are part of behind the scenes building out Distillery Labs and its programming. So tonight, we invite you to join us as we take a little time to learn more about a homegrown female entrepreneur. She is a Pekin native and a graduate of Eureka College, and her list of accomplishments in the short time that she has been on this earth is quite impressive. She is a serial entrepreneur and founder of a number of different startups, most notably co-founder and CEO of Fashion Project. Currently, she's the co-founder and investing partner of XFactor Ventures and also co-founder and CEO of Dough, an e-commerce marketplace company that helps customers discover and buy products made by women makers. So without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ms. Anna Palmer.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
We're happy to have you here. It's been so great to get to know you over the past couple of weeks, and we've enjoyed your story. And I know our viewers tonight are really going to enjoy hearing your story as well. So let's get started. Anna, can you tell us a little bit about your family and where you're from?
Sure. So I grew up in Pekin, Illinois, and I like to say I think my family were builders. So my dad was a mechanical engineer and was always tinkering. Have a little bit of entrepreneur blood on each side. Both grandparents on my dad's side were farmers, and then my grandparents on my mom's side, my grandpa actually physically built his house with his two hands. And so always just come from a long line of builders, and growing up in Pekin, I think definitely kind of helped solidify that path.
That's awesome. So, I mean, you talk about your family being builders, and assuming that translated over into you, just knowing your background. So can you give us a little background on what some of your first building projects were?
Sure. So I was always just making weird stuff as a kid. One of my first things that I tried was, I remember being very frustrated that I read somewhere that golf balls were going into lakes and then birds would eat them. And I was concerned about the environmental impact. I was probably, I don't know, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, something like this. And so I attempted to try to make biodegradable golf balls. Combination of like flour, overcooking them in the microwave. It was a disaster. The execution was terrible, smelled up the entire kitchen. But I think that was kind of one of my first forays of seeing a problem that I was really passionate about and wanting to try to solve it, even though maybe it didn't go super well.
So I'm sure that many creators, builders, and entrepreneurs can relate, that it takes several failures to, create something that actually works. So can you talk about, when was the time that you built or created something that did work for you?
So I think my first time of having some idea in my head and creating something that actually worked was, I was part of a problem solving competition called Odyssey the Mind. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but the premise was you take a bunch of middle school kids and you give them a problem to solve. And our team was creating this skit where we had a haunted bedroom. So one of the people were having a nightmare and they were going through their bedroom and things were coming alive. And my team, when I was in 5th grade, created a pair of dresser drawers that was like 6 feet tall out of cardboard and a bunch of stuff. Took apart a hand mixer, put hangers with that, like created this kind of engineering thing, put that with a like motion sensor. So you drive this bed by it and then it would come alive and the drawers would open and close. And that, we ended up winning the Renato Fusco Award, which was the Global Creativity Award across all the different categories and all the different countries for that project. And so having that experience of having something that was like totally crazy in our brains and then created it and then seeing people react to that was probably the first time that I saw like, oh, you can create things and people can emotionally respond to it and they can bring people joy.
That's so cool. And
Amazing.
then just making sure that everyone heard this, you said fifth grade, right? You did all that in fifth grade.
Yeah. In the skit, I was Shirley Temple. And so there's a lot of awkward pictures floating around of like a long story, but
you didn't tell us about that before. Yeah. Otherwise we would have probably had to have shared that tonight.
Yeah. An experience I'd like to forget because it was a bunch of 10-year-olds with curling irons very close to my head. So a little bit traumatic, my own nightmare, but it was great. I mean, it was an incredible experience.
We all have those photos. No worries.
Yep.
Well, let's jump forward then too. So you are a Eureka College graduate, but not only were you studying while in college, you also did a little campaigning. Can you tell us about that? What was that like? And why did you want to go into joining a campaign?
So campaigning was my life in college. I mean, part of why I chose Eureka was it was in my congressional district. And throughout that experience, though, I realized that there's so many parallels between campaigning and starting a company. I would encourage anyone, if they think eventually they want to be an entrepreneur, to go and start a company first. I was actually fortunate enough to get to write an article for Forbes about this and talked about how, so it's one of the few times that you can go ask all of your friends and family for money for this crazy idea, which at that point in time is a candidate, and then stand publicly as the results come in and potentially fail and lose it all. And then you have to pick yourself up the next day and work on another campaign or figure out something else and do it all over again. And I think that resilience where you realize like, oh, I failed and it's okay. I survived. It really builds a muscle in you that it means you're not scared anymore because you know that you'll ultimately be okay. So tons of similarities there. And then also like a lot of campaigning is numbers and quantifiable and saying like, all right, we know we need this number of votes. How do I get there? Kind of same as when you're pitching a product. All the marketing things kind of correspond with that. And you have to listen to your constituents the same way you listen to your customers. So it was a really great training ground, I think. And then my personal interest in that is I'm just really passionate about opportunity and economic opportunity and figuring out how do you potentially better people's lives. And so there's a theme across all of the companies that I've made that is that, and that stems back from my time in politics.
Got it. And quick question, what interests you so much about economic opportunity? Is there something that sparked you in that interest when you were younger, or what drives that mission?
I mean, a lot of it was just, I think, talking to people. And I mean, we'll get to this a little bit later, but I think there's so much potential in Peoria and Pekin and that idea, especially now, kind of seeing where my life was in Pekin and then coming out here in Boston and the different opportunities, it's just something that became a huge passion of mine.
Excellent.
That's really, really cool. And so it sounds like from talking to you before this, you went down that campaigning path a little bit post Eureka College. So can you tell us a little bit about where you went right after Eureka?
So I went from Eureka to Harvard Law, thinking I was going to go into politics full time. So my thought was, I'm going to get my law degree, then ultimately go and run for office. Once I got there, I realized the part of politics I really enjoyed was the building and the campaign and the organizational part, not necessarily just the policy. And so life had kind of a weird turn where I got introduced to startups and left the politics side a bit behind and started working on my first company my last year in law school. And then once I graduated, never took the bar, decided to kind of burn that bridge to make sure that I had to fight and make the company work instead. In hindsight, it worked out, but at the time it might've been crazy. And so life took an entirely different direction.
So that's a really big pivot. Like at one point in time, you thought maybe law campaigning and then completely shut that door to move into the startup space. Can you just talk a little bit about the thinking behind that and how you made that decision?
I think I just realized, kind of similar to what we were talking about before, like there's so many similarities between the two. And there's a moment in law school where I realized like I could either work on campaigns or I could create something from a company that funds the things that I'm interested in and helps lift people up that way. And so it was one and the same mission. It was just different approaches. So I'm not so sure it was actually that big of a pivot, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk more about this pivot and its fashion project, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about Fashion Project and the premise of it? And I know there's quite a story behind it that I know that would be a great story to tell with all of our viewers tonight.
Sure. So the mission of Fashion Project was to change the world through clothing donation. And so the way it works, it was an e-commerce marketplace. So you could send your clothes in, we would process them, list them, and then when you go to buy them on the site, you could see, oh, this handbag feeds 47 families, or if you're buying a shoe, potentially, that's going to go back to fund women entrepreneurs in Ghana. There's this mission-driven marketplace idea. And then as the company evolved, one of the big pieces of that became, we powered all the clothing donation programs for Nordstrom, Neiman Marcus, Lord & Taylor, Simon Malls, anywhere that you were potentially exchanging your clothes for gift cards, that was probably Fashion Project, either in the background or at the forefront.
Wow. And you didn't do this by yourself?
No. So I had a wonderful co-founder, Christine, who we joke that we're still kind of work wives for life. So she's working with me on Dough as well.
How'd you meet her?
She was in my section at law school.
Okay.
But we only briefly knew each other. Like, we were in classes together, but Harvard Law is really big and we weren't necessarily in the same social circles. I was joking earlier that the only memory she had of me is really going to her Halloween party where my husband and I wore full-on wetsuits to a very small, cramped apartment party, and lasted about 15 minutes because they were so hot. We had to leave early. And so that was really like Christine and I's interaction beforehand. But then come to graduation, and Harvard Law makes you graduate for hours. I think they wanted to make you get your money's worth. And so it's like ceremony after ceremony after ceremony. And Christine's last name was Risk and mine was Palmer. So we're next to each other for a long, long time, talking about what are you doing after you graduate. And through that conversation, I mentioned the company, and she's like, I think I don't really want to go into law either. I was kind of thinking of startup thing too. And I said, great, do you want to come and just look at my pitch deck and we can, talk about it. And she did that. And then we scheduled a meeting for a couple days later, and then the next week, and then next thing you know, we were just founding it together. Like, it was very
Wow. That's amazing. Like, that's the best friendships too. That's organic and came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And you both have a story to tell of just the hardships of, the Nordstrom story, which I love hearing because it's so inspirational. You didn't back down. And I think it's something to share with everybody of how you didn't stop. You wanted your dream to happen. So can you tell us about that?
So I think in any point in time in a company, you're going to have these near-death experiences that happen. Very rarely do you actually have that hockey stick trajectory. And we had a lot of them along the way of Fashion Project. Most of the time, no one else even knew they were happening. But one of those was we had done this huge marketing promotion with Nordstrom, and we were going to be in all of their different stores, so like 200 something stores, powering all of their clothing donation programs. Like, there were a lot of people involved in this. Had raised about a little over $2 million to fund the program from outside investors, had hired up. So we had an entire team that was just there to do this. And about 2 weeks before the program went to launch, we got a phone call from Terry, who's our contact at Nordstrom. And she said, Anna, I'm so sorry about this, but we can't run this. And I said, oh, okay. Why is that? And she said, well, from a merchandise perspective, our merchandising team is really worried about the relationship with Chanel and Prada and the European brands if we're taking in these donations and then you're listing them for sale, because there's a lot of weird contractual relationships there that they have to be really careful in what they sell online, what they don't. And she's like, so I can't do it. It's off. And so I asked her, I was like, can you give me like a couple weeks, just give me like a little bit of time to see if I can fix this. And if I get the sign off on all of these brands, will you launch the program? Mm-hmm. She said, yeah, but it's European Fashion Week. Like, good luck. Even House of Chanel is like a black box in normal times, like, let alone this. And so we had this moment where Christine and I were sitting on a park bench and overlooking the water. And then you have like, you know, half an hour, just, okay, that's it. Like, we're done. What do we do? Like, we're not gonna be able to do this. Company's over, like, this is it. And then you pick yourself up and you say, all right, it's not no, it's just not yet. How do we fix this? And so I went on a stalking expedition for the head of wholesale for Chanel. And long story short, so I'd even gone so far as I'd like mapped out like what was her likely route to work, because I knew where she lived, and like, could I just run into her in a coffee shop? I don't know, like what yoga studio did she go to? It was intense. But I ended up having contact, eventually ended up convincing this person to go and ask Joyce, who she had used to work for. And she was, you know, amazingly gracious in doing that. And she ended up talking to Joyce, and Joyce said, oh, this is all actually a misunderstanding. We thought Nordstrom was actually reselling the bags that we were giving them. All right, I'll write this email. So she wrote an email to me that said, good luck with the program, and it had an exclamation point. And then from that, forwarded to Terry, and that exclamation point basically saved the company. So Terry's like, great, I'm gonna put that on all the slide decks. Joyce Green from Chanel says, good luck, exclamation point. And then the program got back on.
Wow.
But that was probably, it was so stressful. But a good example of like, you're gonna hit walls like that all the time as an entrepreneur, and just figuring out how do you solve it? Because all you have to do is like get one person to agree to do something that then maybe can ultimately get you to where you need to go. So we launched it, and it was wildly successful. We ended up getting over 300,000 clothing donations, gave back money to charities in 36 countries. It was a pivotal point for the company.
Amazing. And you touched upon it a little bit, but the mental game, you could have easily had stopped, but you didn't. And that's the best part, I think, of you kept going, and you're like, I'm going to get this. And you did, which is huge.
Yeah. And
can you tell us?
I think no one would have blamed you, you know, if you would have just taken that no and been like, oh, I guess this isn't going to work. We're going to have to backpedal, you know, but you didn't, and something incredible came out of it. So
I think at that point, though, I mean, to even get that program there, like there was a long process of even just pitching Nordstrom when we had only a slide deck, and there were maybe 8 of us in the office. Obviously, Nordstrom is this massive company, and so I mean, you're always just doing the impossible. And so the idea of like having another impossible thing, like all you have to do is figure out that one thing. Just figure out that one thing, and then you move to the next thing. And eventually, then you build something great.
Yep.
That's awesome. And, you know, it's so great to hear about your first real success in building a company, but that's not where it stops either, because we know that you have 2 other ventures that you have been a part of. So can you give us a little bit about what you're doing now, and those next 2 things that came after Fashion Project?
Sure. So I'm a huge believer in solving the problem that you're meant to solve. So the things that you can personally end up interacting with. And one of the things that I had found through Fashion Project was there are very few women on the other side of the table. And so I'd walk into these meetings to fundraise, and I'd have to be explaining that, like, yes, people actually do wear secondhand clothing from other people. Like, there's this entire marketplace called eBay that kind of helps do this thing. And it was just really hard because it wasn't our target market. I mean, most of our women that we were working with were, you know, it was almost entirely female, both on the nonprofit side and in the clothing side. And so that was hard. And so coming out of that experience, just realized, like, if I had that much of a challenge, we ended up raising a little over 13 million for Fashion Project, which I feel so grateful. I mean, if you look at the stats for female founders, that usually doesn't happen. So got so fortunate with that, but became really passionate of, like, what opportunities are we missing out on just because you don't have women on the other side of the table? And what does that mean? Like, it could have been all of these things got funded that didn't, just because people maybe weren't inherently understanding them. And so launched XFactor Ventures to solve that problem. So we're early stage seed fund. We have 22 partners now in 6 different cities. We've done 52 investments, everything from like plant-based protein to quantum computing to really cool, like interior design furniture stuff. Like we really run the gamut of things. And then we do kind of anything from like, I have an idea and just a slide deck to I'm raising like $2 million. It's kind of our sweet spot. So that's been really fun. And then through that, related, I've seen a lot of companies that were building amazing things, but they weren't going to be billion-dollar exits. So it didn't make sense to invest through XFactor, but wanted to create a vehicle to help those women rise as well. And so got back together with Vanessa, who I'd met through fashion projects, ended up launching Dough, which is a marketplace to shop and discover products made by women. And that was really to solve that problem of, all right, there's so much cool stuff out there. I'm seeing it because I'm investing in it, but how do I expose this to everybody else? The world needs to know.
Amazing.
Absolutely amazing.
So many amazing things. I love hearing about them all.
And you're really committed to helping female entrepreneurs. So tell us about your experience and why you're so passionate about helping female entrepreneurs.
I just think there's so much opportunity there. Like, even if you look at the stats right now, women are starting businesses at a much higher rate even than men. And so there's like this entire new world and market opportunity out there. And just to be able to help those women rise and think about, all right, everything from like, you know, I want to launch a product to I want to build the next billion-dollar company that goes public, to be able to mentor anyone along that path is super rewarding, and the world needs it.
Definitely. I could not agree with you more. And when you look at different opportunities, how do you recognize the opportunities?
For myself personally, what I want to build?
For yourself personally, and maybe if you're helping other female entrepreneurs, what would you say to them? Like, how would you help them recognize opportunities?
So I would say, look at what you're uniquely situated to start. So like my personal experience where Fashion Project came from was I grew up in Pekin. I was used to this idea of garage sales. So my parents would have garage sales pretty much every year, every other year. So I knew just how much money you could raise from old stuff sitting in your closet. My church food pantry was funded off of a big garage sale. It was very much inherent to who I was and how I grew up. And then overlay that with Harvard Law and realizing people are claiming all of these things on their taxes for $200 handbags, but if you're selling it at a garage sale or Goodwill, you're actually getting $12 for it. Can't you create something that recaptures all that value just by packaging it and reselling it in a way that people trust? And so that's where that came from. It was just like my entire life path led to putting those two things together, and I was uniquely qualified to start that. Similarly, I talked about my journey with XFactor Ventures and Dough. It was the same thing with both of those. And so I would say if you're looking at starting a company, think about like, what are the problems that you've encountered and what are the things that you've seen and what really is something that is unique to your life experience that you can then be an expert in and you would kind of intrinsically know how to solve. So I'm attracted to businesses where people are solving their own problems, for sure.
Neat. So just thinking about your co-founder and the experience that you've had with having a co-founder and building something from the ground, why is it who you start a company with so important?
People are everything in companies. I think if you look at why most businesses fail early on, most of those are people problems, not product problems, which is interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so I think knowing who you're starting it with, the counter to that though is you have to know yourself first. So I think it's incredibly important to know like what are your strengths and weaknesses, and then that's where you go out and you find somebody that then matches with that. And then the two of you as founders, like you're going to set the entire culture of the company. And so however you interact, that's how everyone is probably going to interact because it just stems out from the founders like that. So vitally important, but know yourself first and then find the person that matches that.
I love that. And Audrey, Anna, we've talked about that a lot the past couple of weeks of just knowing yourself and knowing that you don't have to have all the answers for everything. Wouldn't you agree?
100%.
Yeah. And trusting and asking for help. I mean, that's probably number one, I think, as females. We have to do that just a little bit better. I know myself, I do, at least.
Yeah, I think the biggest secret of entrepreneurship is most of the time, none of us actually know what we're doing, because you're always doing stuff that you've never done before. Otherwise, it wouldn't be innovation, right? And so trusting yourself that you're going to find the answer is so important, because ultimately you will. And so I think not being afraid of just not knowing, and trusting yourself to do that is super important.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to hang in this kind of realm a little bit, because we're kind of starting to move into the culture realm. And, you know, you talk about finding the right person to start a business with and knowing yourself, but why is curating the right culture in a company so important when you're starting a new business endeavor?
We touched on this a little bit earlier, but I mean, the people are everything. So I would say, even looking back in my entrepreneurial journey, like, the thing I am most proud of is the people that came through the organizations that we created. So I think it's really being cognizant that whatever you're doing culturally and what your values are, like, you have to be able to translate those into the company. So, like, as an example with Doe, we have a huge value around inclusivity and diversity. And from day one, we made a commitment that we're going to be 50% diverse all of the time across everything we do. And to do that, that meant we put a transparent pay scale in practice. So that way we didn't have any sort of bias when it came to salary negotiations. We were really careful about who we partnered with. We thought a lot about, all right, like, where do you even advertise job placements? And by kind of doing that with the company culture early, then now as the organization has grown, it can organically, all of that has cascaded out. But if you don't do that from day one, trying to steer that ship in a direction that it already is not going, once it gets bigger, it just gets harder. So I think all the great founders I've seen have been pretty thoughtful about that from, like, very, very, very early within the first hires.
That's awesome. And I love all those points you make. You know, I think it's just so important that you have all that. I mean, like you said, there's some things you don't have figured out and you're just kind of making it up, but to know yourself and to know your people and to know what you value. And it sounds like you've really worked that out through the companies that you've had. So that's really awesome. Taking a little bit of a pivot now, and just for everyone listening, you know, just to remind you that Anna is from Pekin, Illinois, and went to Eureka College. So we're so lucky to have you, you know, talking to you, listening to all that you've accomplished. You know, it's just really cool to think about how you're from here. You're just one of us, you know? And so I know recently you've had the opportunity to come back to the Greater Peoria region, participate in our Greater Peoria homecoming event. And I just want to take a moment to give you an opportunity to talk about, you know, some of the observations that you made about Greater Peoria when you were back here and our culture here.
I am so excited about what's happening in Peoria. I think there's so much opportunity there, and just the amount of innovation. And if you just start looking at all the different pieces between distillery labs and, you know, what's been happening there, and starting to see some of those successes like bump boxes, natural fiber welding, et cetera, like, you can kind of already see, like, the kind of national, like, kind of coalition and the fire starting to rise, and becoming a huge innovation hub. And so very excited about that. I think the opportunity specifically for Peoria that I talked a little bit when I was back is, I've actually noticed that Peoria has an instinct on entrepreneurship and product innovation that a lot of places don't have. So, and obviously, like, the will it play in Peoria thing is something that's been around for a while. But one of the stories I told when I was back was that when Stitch Fix initially was launching, I had a chance to meet the entrepreneur here in Boston, Katrina. And then I started seeing all of a sudden, pretty early on, people in Peoria starting sharing what she built. Even before all of my East Coast friends were like, no way, we're not going to fund this. It's not going to be a business, like, not happening. And people from Central Illinois were like, hey, like, this is amazing. You should use it. And to watch that trend now happen across a couple of different businesses, I feel like Peoria probably doesn't even know, like, what you guys have, like, the ability to realize what will be big before it actually is. I think is a huge opportunity as well. So I think the idea of, can Peoria start creating, you know, 100, 200 of these companies eventually, is pretty exciting. And I think we're starting to trend in that direction.
So then what do you see, you know, if you could kind of like wave a magic wand and in 5 years, this is what Peoria's innovation space looks like what would it look like to you? And what do you hope that we look like?
I want Peoria to be on the cover of Inc. magazine for one of the best places in America to build a business. 5 years from now, that's what I see.
Love that. We're recording this, right? Let's
make it happen.
Yes.
To that point though, I mean, you have this amazing space that's going to be created. I think the people that I've met now along this journey who've been working tirelessly to just start talking about innovation and laying the groundwork for that. And then I think everything that's happened now, especially even with COVID, like a lot of my friends that are entrepreneurs in San Francisco, New York, et cetera, they're all moving out of those areas and starting to look elsewhere. And so communities like Peoria have this huge opportunity to then capitalize on that. And as it gets easier and faster to start companies by all the tools that have been created, it takes less capital. Communities like Peoria then become really attractive. And also, if you have a chance between building something in Peoria as an entrepreneur and potentially having more space, it's less expensive. There's a lot of actually like tangible economic benefits to that. Why wouldn't alongside of it just being an amazing place?
So I'm just really quick gonna put you on the spot because you just said it. So then we have this great opportunity to attract people back here. So what would make Anna Palmer consider coming back to a greater Peoria to continue accomplishing great things here?
I mean, my heart is definitely still at Peoria, and it's something that I feel very, very called to do at some point in time. So whether that be full-time or just spending a lot more time and investing talent and resources there, we'll see. But I am very committed to seeing the area grow and doing what I can to do that.
Awesome.
Peoria is a great place for sure. Do you stay connected to people that left Peoria, such as entrepreneurs that were from here that moved as well away? Do you think that maybe they want to come back too if you were to come back?
I do. So this is why I think Peoria is so interesting, is that we've actually had a ton of amazing entrepreneurs come through Peoria. It's just, I think a lot of times you don't even realize it. So I was talking with an entrepreneur, this probably a couple of weeks ago, but she was pitching me her company. And I looked at her background and it was this golf course. And I was like, wait, where are you? And it turned out that she was right outside of Peoria at her parents' house. And she now is an entrepreneur, big kind of marketer in the tech space out in New York. And no idea that she was actually from Central Illinois. So there's a ton of a network like that. And I probably know 6 or 7 just off the top of my head of people that have done incredible things. And we're talking like multi-billion dollars of market caps that have come from people that passed through Peoria.
We'll bring them back with you. I love it.
I'll do my best.
Yeah. So fun. Well, I have a question for you. I mean, just you've gone through so much in your life, and each stage you've grown a little bit. What would you say to your 25-year-old self? We've talked about it a little bit in the past weeks, but I'd love to know, like, what would you say to yourself?
I would say just go for it. 25-year-old me. So I think I was decently confident on the entrepreneur side, and I thought that was what I was meant to do. But I think I had this misconception that I somehow needed to know everything. And so there was this nervousness around, all right, but I'm not an e-commerce expert. I'm not an expert in fashion. At the time, when we started Fashion Project, I was wearing ironic Star Trek t-shirts and Converses. I was definitively not a fashion person. So much so that at the early side of the company, my head of merchandising would vet the answers of Christine and I to make sure that they were on brand. And then they would just change them to whatever they thought we should have said as our fashion icons. I think I said Ellen DeGeneres and Suri Cruise or something in one interview, and it got changed to Mary-Kate Olsen. So that tells you how little I knew about that industry when we started, but you figure it out. And so I think I would say 25-year-old me, just do it, go for it. And then be really cognizant about the people you bring along that journey with you, because the way that you build that company is with great people.
Yeah.
So
it's so true. And that kind of ties in with the culture of Why is it so important for you to pick the right people when you create a business?
Yeah. I mean, people are everything. I think if I look back on any moment, I think in XFactor, Dough, fashion projects, there were always a couple of people that changed the velocity of the company. And that was just people willing to help. And so I guess this kind of goes a little bit to what you were asking earlier. So go for it, bring the right people along, and don't be scared to ask for help. I would add that in there as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we've got another question. Has COVID-19 affected any of your current ventures? And if so, how have you handled the disruption?
It definitively has. So, I mean, with Dough, our primary means of revenue was wholesale business. So connecting amazing women-owned products with retailers that wanted to sell them. Obviously, that business dramatically changed overnight. And so as a team, we had to think really hard about where do we go from there? How do we pivot that? We did a couple of things. So there was one kind of philanthropic initiative of trying to help business owners get online pretty quickly called Shelf Love that we had launched. And then the primary business, we pivoted to doing all direct to consumer. So sometime in the next 3 or 4 weeks, we'll have the full marketplace launch, and you'll be able to go on and buy hundreds and hundreds of products from women business owners that previously retailers would have been able to buy, but now you can buy as a consumer. So it's definitely affected it. It's been an adventure, but to what we went and talked about earlier, the idea of, all right, like you just have to do one impossible thing. So we're working on our one impossible thing right now. And then it's been interesting because across my portfolio, companies have gone either way. So it's either like companies have been extremely affected and overnight the revenues almost dropped to zero, or they went the other way where the revenues went through the roof. So like example of that, there's a company that I'm investors in Mexico that they pivoted overnight to do like in-store delivery. So all of the stuff of like pick and pack inside the store and then bring that to customers. Mexico didn't have the infrastructure that the United States had. So they became that company and went from what they were doing for revenue to about 18x of that overnight, which is pretty crazy. So yeah, COVID's had a huge effect on both sides of that, good and bad.
Wow. Well, we have another question too. We're booming with questions here for you. With your experience in e-commerce, what would be your best advice to someone looking to venture into that online sales space?
Ooh, great question. I think my advice would be figure out how to do everything as quick and easy as possible. So now there's a lot of platforms already made for things like that. So Shopify, Squarespace, etc. And try to kind of test out like, what is it that actually gets people to buy? And then once you can figure that out, then that's when you invest resources into that. As opposed to, I think I've seen a lot of companies who spend a ton of time developing website and branding, all of those things before they figure out if their core product is something that people want. So my advice would be quick and dirty, as fast as you possibly can, learn all you can. And then once you know, okay, for sure, customers love this, then start focusing on all kind of the bells and whistles that go along with that.
Great advice.
So we've got another question. Other than finance and funding, what do you see as the biggest challenges for female entrepreneurs and how do you propose to solve them?
Probably mentorship, actually, in that just because of the entire pipeline, if you look at the number of female founded companies that have reached kind of that $1 billion status, there's just not that many. And so this entire mentorship structure of usually you'd have like, I'll use Facebook as an example, but like Facebook, they go public, they launch all these kind of other spin out companies from people who learned from the founders of Facebook. And they create like that, they call it Facebook Mafia, but they like create this thing that comes out of that organization. And I think because women haven't had the same just volume of successes, partially because of financing and all of those things, you don't have the same structure of mentorship network. And so one of the ways that we've tried to get around that with XFactor is all of our XFactor partners are current operators. So collectively across our partners, we've raised about $600 million in venture money and employ thousands and thousands of people. So some really amazing women that know what they're doing. And so not just the capital part of XFactor, but the really valuable part is, okay, like you're in the trenches, your company's starting to scale. What do you do that actually makes a difference? And we'll help make all of that easy for you. So that way you can grow to that size and then start helping the next generation.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, oh, we have another one. Meg, you want to take that?
Sure. So Anna, based on your childhood and time in Greater Peoria, what industries do you think we have the best opportunity to succeed with and that we might not currently be looking at?
My answer on this is probably going to be biased because I'm a consumer founder, but I think one of the benefits of Peoria is that there are a lot of communities that look like Peoria. Peoria is obviously better than all of those, but there's a lot of similarities there, right? So if you have something that works concept-wise, so I would take like Ron, the founder of Panera, as an example. He's created this incredible chain of restaurants that produce a ton of wealth for him and a lot of other people along the way. You could very much see in Peoria, like if you have a concept that works from restaurant, from retail, like there's a lot of people doing awesome stuff. Like imagine like Zion Coffee, you scale that out to 400 locations to all the communities that kind of have similar demographics to Peoria. You already know the model works. And so you could create huge amounts of wealth just off of those types of companies. So I think that's an opportunity. It's a little bit different than what you get like kind of big, let's go after the sexy billion-dollar venture exits. But I think it's a big opportunity. So I would say that. And then other things, I think Peoria is doing a really good job of focusing on that. I mean, agriculture is obviously something that is just there in the community and you could scale that up. I think the autonomous mobility part is really interesting. I would agree with that. Healthcare, for sure. I think that would probably, the consumer side is probably the one thing I would add, whether that be like retail concepts or e-commerce with lump boxes, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I'm impressed by all the questions tonight. It's great.
None of them so far have been too hard. So if anyone has a really hard one, feel free.
So we are coming to the end of our time and I just want to give you the opportunity, you know, if you have anything that we haven't hit on or that you really want to make sure that you share with our viewers, this is your time.
Whew, putting me on the spot.
Sorry.
I think we covered a lot of it. I think just really emphasizing what I said earlier, Peoria is a great place to start a business. And now I think you're going to start seeing some really interesting things coming out of there. And so if you are somebody that has an idea, like over the last couple of weeks, I've actually been on the phone with 2 different entrepreneurs in Peoria that are kind of thinking about starting a thing. If that is you and you're thinking about that, just take the first step to do it and start asking people, share your idea. And then hopefully those people will talk to other people and you'll get the resources that you need to make it happen. I'm also available. So if there's anyone that wants to talk to me directly, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I will do my best to help as well. But yeah, I think that would be my final message is huge opportunity. And if you're thinking about it, like take the jump and just do it.
That's awesome.
Inspirational.
Definitely. I mean, thank you so much for taking the time tonight to just share your story with us and with our audience. I think it's just so impactful. Like I said, you being homegrown from here and all the wonderful things that you've done and just your willingness to share both your failures, your challenges, and your wins, you know, I think are inspirational to everyone out there who's thinking about potentially starting something. So Meg, do you have anything else?
Just thank you, Anna. It's so great to meet you via Zoom, and I hope that we get to actually meet you in person sometime.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thanks. This has been great. I appreciate you having me.